Hey there, and welcome to Exponential Next series, A Call Generation. In this series, we are diving into the raw and real process of uncovering your calling. I'm Carrie Williams, the Executive Director of Exponential Next, and I'm really glad that you're joining us for this episode. Today, we're exploring the powerful truth that nothing in your story is wasted. Not the pain, not the detours, not even the heartbreaks. We'll walk through um, a conversation about God using every chapter in your life, including the messy and definitely the unexpected ones. And as preparation for your calling, we think that your story matters a lot along the way. Your journey probably is way more important than the destination. And when it really comes to your calling and to walking out just obedience to Jesus along the way. And today we're honored to have my friend Elyse here joining us. She's a pastor, an author, a sought after speaker, and an amazing encourager. And I'm going to have her introduce herself and tell us all about who you are, um, what you do, all the fun things.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for inviting a crazy Australian who moved to America onto the show. So I'm so honored for this conversation and I'm excited. This is probably my favorite topic to talk about, honestly, of like the past that you think disqualifies you, how it might actually be the setup to what God wants to do in your life. I think we need to get honest and messy and gritty with our stories. And so yes, Carrie, I'm so excited. I was born in Australia and the accent is from my mom. There is nothing we can do about it. And I moved to America about, it's got to be like 12 years ago now, which is crazy. Moved to Los Angeles, California from my childhood bedroom in my childhood home as a
Wow.
pastor's kid. So when we talk about sheltered pastor's kids, we talk about then Elyse Murphy, now Elyse Mahan. And I moved to LA and for a long time was just a lost girl in a big city with a ministry face, honestly. We can talk about that in a little bit. But am so grateful for my years in Los Angeles. Was at a church there called Oasis Church with Pastor Philip and Holly Wagner, who are still some of my favorite people in the entire world. And did like 10 years of ministry there and then did a few years of ministry outside the four walls of church. And then went and fell in love with a boy and moved to Lakeland, Florida, and became an instant mom of two little girls, Zara and Milan, 5 and 7. And now am pregnant, baking. You're watching video, baking a boy who is due in the next couple of months. And so and so many ups and downs and loop-de-loops thrown in between. I never saw this being my story, but now I wouldn't change it. One of those stories. And so, yeah, like have been in ministry in a sense my whole life and have been in my own eyes disqualified from ministry a gazillion times as well. So, I'm just a church kid that learned that her messy, imperfect story was somehow the very vehicle that God wanted to bring healing in
Mm.
the areas that I felt the most broken. God didn't just restore and put back together the pieces of my heart. He actually used those broken pieces to bring healing to so many other people as well. So, and then I get to meet amazing friends like you along the way, and it's so
Yeah.
fun.
So fun. And if
Yeah.
you are listening and not watching, I just need to tell you that this girl is glowing and looks amazing as a pregnant woman. Like I can just attest that when I was pregnant with my children, I looked nothing like that. And
No,
just
no,
you
no. The
look
glow, the
absolutely
glow
gorgeous.
is sweat, Carrie. The glow is sweat. It's
Come
not a
on,
glow.
just take
There's,
it. You look amazing.
that's the kind of thing we need to tell pregnant people too. Don't
Yes.
don't be like, you're ready to pop any day. I feel like I'm ready to pop any
Oh
day.
yeah.
You don't need to
No,
tell me, all right? So
no. And definitely don't say how many babies are you having? That's
yeah, it
never a
looks
good
like you could
one.
be having quadruplets. I feel it, Mary. All right? Sit down before the hormones also become aggression. Okay? This is where we are walking a fine line right now. I already
So
had no
good.
milk before, and then I got pregnant, and my husband's like, oh no. So conversations like this, we could go anywhere.
Yeah, which is great. We don't want to filter here. We want
Yep,
we want the raw truth. We want
that's
we
right.
want to go there. We want to be honest with ourselves
Yeah.
so that we can be honest with God and honest with others. And that is kind of part of the theme of this conversation that we're having in this series. Being honest with ourselves, honest with God, honest with others. Which ultimately will lead us down a path of realizing that God can use us no matter where we're from, where we are, what we've done, what we're doing. He's in our midst. He wants our best yes, which is just a simple yes. And so let's talk about that. Elyse, what does it mean to you when I say nothing is wasted? Talk
Oh,
about your life, the good, the bad, the painful, um, and that later proved to be preparation. Like the things that when you're in it weren't great,
yeah.
but as you look back now, you recognize, man, God was in that and he was
Oh,
preparing
yeah.
me and used it. He used it as preparation.
Yeah, he didn't just tolerate it. He used it.
That's
And I
right.
think
That's
that's the
right.
piece that so often we look at the detours that we thought at the moment in that time were dead ends, and we're like, "Oh God, thank you for ignoring that." And God's like, "I didn't just ignore it." Beth Moore once said that God doesn't tie up the loose ends, he ties them all into the story. And I think that has been the theme and the thread of my life has been that where I thought there were just so many loose ends that God put up with me, I look back now and I'm like, God, I don't even know how it works. I don't know how in your sovereignty and in your grace and in your, I really could have made a better decision and then I didn't. You've still incorporated all of it to make what you're doing in your people even better. Not just despite my decisions, but using all of the decisions, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I think I mentioned it, but when I moved to Los Angeles from being a very, very sheltered church kid that thought she knew everything. Like I was so good at green rooms, I just wasn't good at friendship. And other church kids might know what I'm talking about is that you just get, and pastors will know what I'm talking about. You get so good at networking that you actually forget how to show someone all of the sides of you. Like you can show your best side to anyone, but who is the one seeing all of the sides of you? And so I got so good at networking, which is a skill, right? And is a strength in a lot of ways. But I didn't realize I had taken what was meant to be a skill and made it an identity. And so I would just shapeshift to be whoever the person in front of me needed me to be. And you can spiritualize anything. I was like, well, Paul said, I become like all men in the hopes that I might win some. I just wasn't winning any. I was just, feeling better in my ego. And so I moved to Los Angeles, the city of child stars, the city of people being like, you are the exception in your family. So, like, everyone has road rage because everyone's like, I should have been able to cut into this traffic. And you're like, well, that's because we're in a city of all of the youngest children that were like, I'm the star in my family. So, I moved there with just no experience of honestly real world and honesty and grit, just a professional church kid
Mm.
really like just a lost girl in a big city trying to figure out not only where I fit in, but who I am in order to fit in. And it led to some very precarious situations, honestly, not because I had a rebellious heart. That wasn't the problem. It was like I just had a really afraid heart. I was so afraid that I wasn't going to fit in. I was so afraid that I wasn't going to be loved and accepted that I would just do anything to be accepted and to be loved. And so I was in ministry. Like I said, I had just released my first book called Confessions of a Church Kid, which was such an ironic name at the time about being honest. That has always been a theme of my life, but in this season where I wasn't honest with anyone else around me. And so it was almost the irony of promoting a book that I wasn't living
Mm.
and getting myself into these heartbreak situationships. That was the first time I'd heard that term. And I was like, what's that? I guess I'm in one. Like trying to figure out dating and boundaries and how to preach on a Sunday, but also be a girl at a dinner table, trying to figure out if I like this guy. And all of that stuff as a young adult you go through when you really do have a heart after God and you also have a life of mistakes that you look around and you're like, surely God could not use me. And you read the stories in the Bible, but for some reason you extend all the grace to them because you know the end of their story and you say, well, no, God couldn't use me because you don't know the end of your story yet. And that was where I was at. And so leading me to a place of getting into a relationship with one of a guy that was a volunteer in our worship team and engaged and getting married very quickly in 2017 and walking down the aisle in the January of that year only for him to walk out in the December of that year. We didn't even make the 1 year anniversary mark. And so to be kind of faced finally with a reality that I couldn't filter
Mm.
was the breaking that I look back and so desperately needed was actually the kindness of God. It doesn't feel kind, it feels very mean. And I felt very alone and let down. And God didn't cause me to say yes to this marriage or to be in an abusive relationship at all. I don't want people to mishear me. But it was through that season that I learned how close God can be in the pain and just how tangibly comforting our God
Mhm.
is in the moments that we think have ended everything. And I just remember sitting with the reality that not only am I this woman in ministry that feels a calling to preach the good news of Jesus whilst feeling disqualified privately, but now I have divorce added to like my LinkedIn profile. I'm like, who's gonna like what? I'm never preaching again. I'm never in ministry again. That's the end of it. And I really thought that God was done. And it wasn't even in that season that I think I learnt how kind God is with the full circle moments. I
Yeah.
think it was 7, 8 years later. Like, I really thought I got divorced and like God was going to have me remarried like 30 days later. Like, I was like researching I went back to Australia for a little while just to be with my family, to grieve and to get some good like therapy. And my church community was incredible during that season. And I remember reading all these books, and one of the books was talking about how in different tribes in Africa, like they would grieve for 30 days and they like remarry the woman off. And I was like, that's me, remarry me off. I want to get married. I think that sounds great. Like adopting these random things that people do. And I was very quick. I'm an Enneagram 3. I'm like on to the next thing at all times. Of like, all right, that was a failure. Let's pretend that didn't happen. Let's go into something that looks good. And so naturally, it would be 7 years before I met Tim, who's now my husband. And through that 7 years, that was the process. Like that for me was where God showed up. That was for me where honestly I made more mistakes than I made in the first half of it, but there was a difference in it because God was in it with me instead of pushing him away from me.
Yeah.
I learned to come to him with the pieces and be like, what do I do now? Whereas before I used to think I had to hide the pieces. There's this beautiful verse in Jeremiah chapter 30, verse 18. It'll get lost if you don't find it. And God's talking about um where he's rebuilding the city. And he actually says, the NIV version, he says, so the city will be rebuilt on her ruins and the
Mm.
palace will stand in its proper place. And that line, my friend Hannah was talking to me about it one day, and I hadn't seen it or heard it before, but it just hit me like a ton of bricks of realizing that God doesn't want to rebuild afresh. He doesn't
Mm.
want to start over. He wants to take the ruins and build on that. Like, God,
Mm.
why wouldn't you use a new foundation? Why wouldn't you start again? Why wouldn't you probably use someone else at this point? But I think God gets the most glory, not when he starts again, but when we can see what he's built from what was. And
Yes.
that's the story of my life. And so looking back now, I'm so glad it didn't happen in 6 months. I'm so glad that God didn't bring it back around because there was stuff I had to learn. There was me realizing that I didn't need to be married to step into the full calling that God had for me in my life, to step into the authority that He'd given me, Elyse at the time, Murphy, as a preacher, as a writer, as a pastor, as just a Christian, as a daughter of His, to do what He'd called me to do. And it was as those little identity pieces got fixed along the way, not through the trophy moments, but through those moments where I'm like, the tears, and the God, is this ever going to happen for me? That it was actually in those moments where God showed himself so real that now on this side, being married, and having the last 2 years of, after what felt like 7 years of wilderness, the suddenly of God in 2 years and make your head spin what God's done, but being like, I'm so glad that he didn't do it before now, because I
Yeah.
think that I would have thought it was the fix to the ruins, or God, despite my decisions, where I'm seeing now, no, 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 he's used it all the whole time.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so good. And I think anybody with a little bit of life experience under their belt can attest to the goodness of God in that sense that that literally nothing is wasted. And it's not necessarily left behind to the wayside to never think about again. I love that you just talked about how he builds on it. He
Yeah.
takes it and he turns it into the actual foundation of something even more beautiful, and that he doesn't get rid of those old stones or the old, you know, the old ruins. He takes them and he turns them into something amazing. And so, um, as
And
we
it's the
talk about,
beauty of him. Like, we
yeah,
don't know how he does it. That's how he's God. Like, God and his godness. That's our problem, I think, in our day and age, is that we want to plan our way to that. But the way God rebuilds is not with a blueprint. Like, he doesn't do that with the next 5 steps to doing this, with follow this person and you'll be able to, it's different every time. And that's the beauty of who he is that your restoration looks different to my restoration, looks different to the person listening to this, the person that's also already probably got excuses in their head of like, yeah, but you don't know my story. I was that person. I get it. I'm just telling you, I don't know how he does it, but the God that I know rebuilds not with a blank canvas, but with the broken pieces.
yeah, yeah, it's so good. So as we talk about using past as preparation, we
Yeah.
probably have people listening wondering like, how do I reframe my history, even the parts that they regret? And, and so and how do they take it and reframe it in such a way that it's a foundation rather than a flaw? I love that you just talked
Right.
about that piece because how do they take this as whatever season they're in or what they've gone through that you know is coming to their minds right now that maybe they feel disqualified or maybe they have regrets or maybe it was something even done to them, much like your story. um, how do they reframe it so that it is a foundation rather than a flaw?
Well, I think isn't that so much like what happens to us is that God takes us out of um, slavery, if we're using biblical examples. He takes us out of where he took the Israelites out of Egypt. He takes us out of those situations, but if we don't allow him, that stuff will still come with us.
Mhm.
So, yes, you've left the negative situation or the toxic relationship or your past where there was like cyclical sin. But if we don't allow God to heal that in our hearts and in our minds and in our identity, then we'll still carry the weight of that shame into, and that's, I think, how the enemy does it. If he can't steal the future, he'll keep the memories in our head so that we don't allow God to use them to build upon. So he'll
Mhm.
keep them as the chains to the past so that we're always tethered to it rather than fully stepping in. And I think that was the enemy's tactic with me for years. Let me just keep her tethered to the
Yeah.
memory of guilt, of shame, of all of those things so that we don't fully step into who he's called us to be. And I think if we think about like go back to the garden of like our normal, like our not our original state with God, fear wasn't a part of it. That happened when the enemy like came in, but God hasn't given us a spirit of fear. So it's constantly this tension point that I'm always facing is identity and authority. Okay, but I made those decisions. Yeah, okay, but Elyse, Carrie, like you don't understand. Like I was the one that messed up. No, girl, guy, I get it. Like whether it was, you might have a story that is completely different to like yours and mine. They might have a story where it really was their decisions that put them somewhere or somebody else's decisions that they had no control over. And it's like, okay, well, how do I now not see that as this massive blip on my record, if you will? How do I completely 180 it and turn
Mhm.
it into like stepping stones? Like what? Like and it's a crazy mind shift and I understand it, but it's more than a mind shift. I think it has to be the spiritual transformation of understanding that the stories that we make up about our past have the ability to give the authority to the grave, like the empty grave, the power that Jesus Christ conquered when he conquered sin and death in the grave. We either give that authority or we undermine its authority by the stories that we hold on to in our head. And so for
Mhm.
me, it was the realization that, like, so what I'm really saying by being tethered to my past or pretending it didn't exist or hiding away with it in shame or skipping over those parts, um, is that what Jesus did isn't good enough. And maybe someone's listening to it and they're like, okay, it's very elementary to say, how do I actually put that into practice? And I wish I could tell you. I
Mm,
wish I could sit with everyone listening and say, this is your step, this is your path on how to break free from it. But what I've learned is that that's the wrestle. That's where it had to be me and Jesus, where I had to be wrestling and going, yeah, 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 but this, and he has to answer it. And some of
yeah.
that for me, again, 7 years, and it's a daily thing, right? But
Yep.
it came through church. It came through one-on-one, honest relationships with friends that didn't just see the Instagram Elise, the green room Elise, the preacher Elise, but saw the broken girl with broken pieces in toxic patterns. My God, toxic patterns that went, I still love you. I'm not leaving, but I'm not leaving you in this. It happened through therapy, years of therapy, through different practical solutions, through lifestyle changes. Like every single level, physically, emotionally, spiritually, there had to be this shifting and transformation where I got so sick and tired of the cycles of sin and the cycles of rehearsing stories of shame that I
Mm,
actually changed what I was doing on every level to start to live into that new like transformation and health. Does that make sense?
yeah,
So
it does.
I think
Hmm.
that for me, I don't know about you, but like it has been on every single level. Like there are physical changes I had to make to my lifestyle, to health. There was emotional things that therapy was incredible. Like the day that my therapist helped me realize that when I'm in these shame spirals, I need to literally like remove myself and pretend I'm observing the thoughts rather than being caught up in the cobwebs of the shameful thoughts, then the spiritual level of the real raw time with God that actually helped transform me on a spiritual level, that is how I started to change it from my life is one big mistake and will I ever get free from this to, oh wow, God, I'm not where I was and I might not be where I want to be, but you can start to use this.
Yeah. Yeah. So talk about that piece that you just hit on a little bit, like during that season, that 7 years.
Hmm.
So you covered a lot of things of like what the steps you took. And I think people listening might be thinking, what's my first step? What's my one step? And we can't answer that, but we can say here are some things to
Yeah.
consider. But what I want to hone in on is relationship with Jesus and talk about what your relationship with Jesus looked like during that 7 year season when it felt like a valley or a desert or just like that space of
Yeah.
heartbreak and it was just so still fresh and you could feel it and um but you longed for something different
Yeah.
and so talk about the Jesus piece of that
Yeah,
and
it looked like any relationship over 7 years.
yep,
If a relationship looks exactly the same for 7 years, there's probably something dying in it. And
that's
my
right.
relationship with God looked
Mhm.
so different. And there were times when even that became a shame thing where I was like, oh my gosh, it's not what it used to be. Or like, God, am I even hearing you anymore? Are you even there? Did I do something wrong? It looks like most of my relationships now different, but like that kind of up and down. And so some seasons I felt like
Mhm.
I was in the pocket, right where God wanted me to be, right? Like, especially like when I came back from Australia, early days, like after the divorce, I came back from Australia. I was starting again. Like, I had taken the debt that was incurred financially in that marriage and nothing else and
Mm.
was starting not from zero, was starting from like what's worse than ruins? Like underground, if you will, starting in the red, okay? Carrie, I was starting in the red. It wasn't great. And I lived on, I call her a friend now. I just saw her a few weeks ago. I didn't know them. There were a couple in our church that lived in a two-bedroom apartment because if you know Los Angeles, that is basically a mansion. A two-bedroom apartment in Los Angeles with their 2-year-old daughter, Brooklyn, and they opened their home to me to share a room with a 2-year-old. And I
Mm.
was sleeping on a futon for the first 6 months. Like, it didn't look pretty. But then God opened a door for me to get this studio apartment that I still get emotional when I talk about because there was this space for 2 years that I had with God, that I had through COVID, actually. That if you've ever been in a volatile relationship with anyone you've lived with, whether it was a family member or a marriage or a friendship roommate situation, and you don't know what you're walking into, the idea of living in an apartment or a house or a space or a room that you get to come home and set the atmosphere, it has a whole different meaning. And
Mhm.
so for me,
Yeah.
It was these little steps that it's like God was like, okay, now we're going to do this. Okay, now we're going to do this. Okay, now it's you and me in an apartment. And
Mm.
I have some of the most vivid memories of intimacy with God, like out of nowhere. And I'm not one of these like frou-frou people that are like, I see God in the table. Like, you know what I'm talking about? Where you're like,
Yeah.
okay, cool, we were just having dinner, but like, that's fine. But I'm not one of those people. But in that season,
Mm.
I, I didn't meet with God because God didn't go anywhere. I didn't go anywhere. It was like this walking with God that
Yeah.
set the foundation, this new foundation for I truly believe even the days I'm living in 5 years later now.
Mm.
And so I think in terms of steps, what that looked like, so like there was that season, and then there was like year 3 or 4 where I was like starting to date again, and I would think that maybe it's this guy, and then my heart would get broken again, and then the trauma from that we hadn't fully healed yet, because I fully believe that God heals in layers, would come up, and I would think I'm back to square one again. I'm back to where I was 7 years ago, and God's like, no, I'm just healing another layer to like as God would start to raise up a platform here to preach again or over here. And then I would come home, and now the home that used to feel so peaceful and full because it was me and God felt a bit emptier because God was, I think, like starting to create space for family again and starting. And so sometimes we think that those voids we feel are like a defect. But it might
Mm.
just be God creating space for what he's about to do. And so I had to learn even in the seasons where I felt like this gaping wound in my heart for nothing else other than maybe God making space for the 3 humans that were going to come in my life in the next couple of years. But when you don't have anything to fill that space and you feel that temptation of filling it with anything else, that was probably the hardest moments. Because I knew God was bringing it. I knew it wasn't around me then. So I knew it was going to have to just be a miracle. And I knew that waiting wasn't passive. I knew that, like, I preached it all. But sometimes the hardest thing is when you're sitting alone on a couch, knowing what you would preach on a stage and having
Mhm.
to preach it to yourself on a couch when you're sitting alone.
Yep.
Um, and so it was back and forth. And then I just remember this season my best friends and I moved to the OC, and it was such a fun season. We started a ministry together for women out of COVID to just really get them connected back to the local church. We noticed a lot of people weren't going back, and so we were like, okay, we really feel like we're meant to do ministry for a season outside church. And for both of us, that was very foreign. She's a church kid too, and so started this thing called Club Devotion, where I would write these devotionals every month, and we'd have a weekly Zoom call with these girls, and a couple of hundred of women, like women that would be there, and we would just have this community, and it was so God. And then
Mm.
I knew the season was ending. You know, when like just you're in a season and it's like no one's done anything wrong. It's just like this grace has lifted off it. And you're like,
Yes.
this God's shifting something.
Yep.
And it takes you a minute to realize I didn't do anything wrong. But then when you realize it, you're like, oh, are we just meant to do something new? And both of us were confused because we loved it.
Yeah.
And then both of us separately felt so clearly from God that He was like, this season's coming to an end. Do you trust me for what's next? And we both
Mm.
sheepishly one day, I'll never forget sitting in the living room of our apartment because we lived together as well. And we both came to each other with this same thing. And I was like, oh my gosh, I felt like God said that too. But it's not because I don't want to do it with you, you know, girls. And she's like,
Yeah.
well, it's not because I don't want to do it with you either. I love you. I love you more. Like, but we had this invitation to step out
Mm.
again. And
Yeah.
if I'm honest, I was like, God, I don't know how many more times I want to.
Yep.
Like, why you keep asking me to step out?
Yeah.
Those girls over there just get to chill. Like, why
Yep.
are you asking me to do this again?
Yes.
And it was almost like there are these seasons, I think, when God puts us in the wilderness, and then these seasons where He invites us into the wilderness. And we've done a not a great job all the time of teaching what the wilderness is. So we think it's
Yeah.
punishment when it's preparation.
That's good. Yeah.
And so we felt this invitation. This isn't that like there's that verse that says like I'm gonna woo you
Hmm.
into the wilderness. And we were like, do we do it? And I was like, well, if we do it, let's just freaking, oh, sorry. Let's just go. If we do it, let's like go all in.
Yeah.
And so we didn't sign our apartment lease.
Hmm.
We ended the season of club devotion, like ended it well, got them connected to local churches, but felt like God said, okay, had a
Mm.
couple of months of money saved up. Like this wasn't like we didn't have some big plan. In the middle of that, our friends that have a house in Nashville were going to live in their Nashville house. We're like, you can take our LA house for like the rest of the year. We were like, okay. And I'm telling you, like, I didn't have a plan. I just felt like God was like, I have something new. Do you trust me? And she
Yeah.
felt the same thing. And the hype and joy of obedience lasted about 7 business days. And then I was like, what have I done? And I remember it was 2023, September, September,
Mm.
October. And I was like, the first thing I need to do is just take some time off, which is not easy for me. But I did. And I would just like cry. And I
Mm.
think if I look back, I don't know. I don't know this. I think it was a few of those last healing layers from that past season. I had just
Mm.
been through a breakup earlier that year that I didn't see coming, that I really thought was my husband. And it was devastating. Looking back, so
Mm.
grateful because God knew what was coming. But I think there was a few other layers that God was like, let me just heal these little loose ends. I'm not going to let them go anywhere, as we know, but let me heal them. And I remember in the October just being like, God, I think I want to work in ministry again.
Mm.
That's weird. So then I start applying for these jobs in churches that I was very well connected to. Again, remember when I'm a little girl, networking, relationships in church ministry stuff haven't ever been a problem. And yet nothing was landing. And I'm going, okay, I know I asked you, God, like to close any door that wasn't you, but like, could we talk about the tone in which you're closing the doors right now? Because like when God closes a door, he doesn't always like, softly close the door and like open the latch in order for it to, he'll slam that door shut sometimes. And I was a
That's
little
right.
offended with his tone, if I'm honest. And so I was getting a little frustrated with the fact that I was like, God, what about this? What about this? What about this? And then just all of them shutting. And I'm telling you, it was like I was looking at like a semicircle of doors that were shut in my face. And I was like, I thought you asked me to do this.
Mm.
And I'm telling this piece of it because the suddenly was like 2 weeks away. But right before that, suddenly, I don't know that I had ever dealt with so much opposition.
Mm.
And I say that like of like what I actually feel hopeless. I feel on the board of hopeless, and that was a very scary place to be as a girl that doesn't so much struggle with that. And I remember being in my bedroom, not my bedroom, my friend's bedroom that I was living in for free because I was homeless. And it had been day 2 and I had not stopped crying. And Katie, my best friend, had come home and she was like, babe, what's wrong? And I'm like, I don't know. I just feel like God has now forgotten me. Like I feel like I was fine. I get emotional now because it's like that real place of like, God, I know you don't forget about your kids, but like I feel like you have. I know
Yeah.
the truth. And then I have the feeling and the emotion right now that I need to figure out the puzzle pieces fit. And I just remember being on the floor and I remember God saying, I invited you into this, but now you're trying to open all the doors when I've just been trying to give you what you asked me for the whole time.
Mm.
And I had this memory of being 16 years old and walking along the beach in Australia, Cronulla Beach, with my youth leader at the time, Carla Murray, and talking about wanting to do ministry with my husband.
Mm.
And somewhere in the divorce and the 7 years, I knew I wanted to be married and I knew I wanted to be in ministry. But it's like I stopped marrying those two together because I was
Yeah.
like, you know how we
Yep.
do. We're like, God, give me the dream, but like it's okay if it looks like this. And there
Yeah.
is a certain amount of surrender, but I think sometimes we also settle, and surrendering is not settling.
Mm. That's good.
And I felt like God was like, I'm trying to give you this, and you keep trying to go for ministry because ministry has always been easier for you to trust me with than marriage.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm not giving you ministry before I give you this. And
Mm.
Carrie, when I tell you, just something broke.
Mm.
And it wasn't um sad tears. It was like healing tears. You know, like the difference
Yeah.
of that, like,
Yep.
and I remember I feel it right now, like the weight, I remember this weight being lifted off.
Mm.
And 2 days later, I'm serious, 2 days later, and I'm trying to like fill stuff in my schedule. Like I'm like washing cars and like going out for walks, and then I get home and I'm like, I feel like Rapunzel in like Tangled when she's like got the list of things she's done in that day, and she's like, and now it's 8:30 a.m. What do I do now? Like people are like chill, and I was like, how? What is the
Yeah.
chilling that people do? And it's just the funniest season to think back on.
Mm.
And 2 days later, a friend of mine from Australia, Layla, another preacher, had DM'd me on Instagram, and she's like, this is so random, but do you know Tim Mahan? And I remember responding, I've got it in my DMs. Hey, it's a bad time. I'm in the middle of like interviewing for ministry jobs right now. Carrie, this is 2 days earlier. And she's like, okay, I really think you're meant to meet him. Sends me his profile. And I was like, okay, well, he can follow me if he wants. And a week later to the day, another friend who I had met at one of the retreats that we met at,
Mhm.
um, Bethany Thomas, I hadn't talked to her in 2 years, randomly reaches out to me. It's like, this is so random. I'm on a plane right now. Have you ever met this guy named Tim Mahan? And I said, do you know Layla? And she's like, no, I don't know Layla. Like, who's Layla? And I'm like, well, she just mentioned him the other day, but this is so weird. I'm like, okay, well, you can give him my number. So I go on his Instagram because it's 2024. Like, I'm gonna stalk you. Well,
Yeah, of
and I'm
course.
like, hey, you're a single dad. There's a story there. You're in ministry. And then I start looking at mutual friends, and I'm like, wait, he's definitely lived in California. How do we not
Mm.
know each other? We had so many mutual friends. And to this day, we still find out people. Like he's been in ministry circles his whole life. It's crazy that we had never met. And a few years before that, his um, wife had left the family to go and pursue a relationship in New York City. And so he'd become an instant dad overnight to a 1 and a 3-year-old. And he messages me, texts me the next day. We start talking, and the only way I can describe it is just the suddenly of God
Mm.
over the next couple of months. We start talking, we start FaceTiming. He comes out to visit me. He lived in California for years. We lived like 40 minutes away from each other, never knew each other. We thought we think we were at a birthday party one day on the same day at just at different times. And I just say that because you just don't know what God's doing behind the scenes. And when you finally let Him do the thing that He wants to do, it's so much better than you think. I end up moving to Lakeland. I don't have a ministry job for a year. We get married. In the middle of that, I had never been invited more to go and preach at different places all around the country. Um, and was able to make a living doing like God just thinks about all the little things. And the craziest part, we get engaged, we get married, now having a baby. And I look back on it and I think back to those early 7 years
Mm.
in, and I'm in Los Angeles praying, and I have it in my journals, and I'm like journaling, God, like, I'd love to be a mom one day. I just don't know. Like, I really believe that you're going to bring me a man, and I'm going to be a wife. But I could have a 2-year-old right now. Like one of the threads in my journals was always thinking about like if I was still married to my ex-husband, if and we had a kid, the baby would be 3 years old. I'd have a 4-year-old by now. I'd have a 5-year-old. Zara, our 7-year-old, my stepdaughter, was born half an hour away from where I lived in February of 2018, which is when I started journaling that.
Wow.
So parallel my questions to God. God, what are
Hmm.
you doing with my broken pieces? To not seeing him working and not realizing in this parallel universe that God was preparing for me all along that I already did have a daughter. I just hadn't met her yet.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until 7 years later when I was ready, when
Yeah.
Tim was ready, when the girls were ready at the right time, the
Hmm.
suddenly of God came. And now looking back on it, I can't even remember your question that you asked me, but
It's good. Just keep going.
the ups and downs of the relationship over the last 7 years with God, I look back and I'm like, kicking myself of like, why did I ever not trust you? But then I just feel like God smiles and he's like, because it's what you guys do. Like,
Yeah. Yep.
is
You're human.
I know you, like I knew you would, and it's okay, and you won't trust me again. Like
Yeah.
next month when you're like complaining about something else. But it
Mm,
is this thing that I come back to that I'm like, I'm actually grateful on this side. I never thought I'd say it, that it took
mhm.
7 years because I
Yeah.
learned more in those 7 years than I ever have
Hmm.
any other time in my life.
Amazing. Amazing. I know one of the things that you're really, really passionate about is story and the power of a
Yeah.
story. And um, you've given us a glimpse of your story, and you just ended on such a beautiful note of the faithfulness of God and how you're more fulfilled than you could ever even have imagined before. And that picture perfect of, in ministry with my
Yeah.
husband, with children. You're doing those things now. Like you're in it. That's your life. That's how, you're breathing it in every day. Um, so talk to me just for a moment and then we'll wrap up here. But talk to me about how the power of someone's story matters,
Mm.
and how he uses the vulnerable chapters to impact people. I think all of us can recognize in your story how he has used you and your story to bring healing to others who might be in that same, you know, maybe not the exact story, but the same kind of pain points, maybe.
Yeah.
Um, so talk to me about the power of story and how God uses the most vulnerable chapters to impact people.
Gosh. I used to think, again, the green room networking Elise thought um, that it was the highlight reels, the LinkedIn profiles, the impressive accolades, the
Mm,
sermon one-liners
mm,
that people were most impressed by.
mm,
Uh, and I think it was only through conversations when I was at my lowest that I realized how unimpressive those things were when other people would try to put a band-aid on what felt like a gaping wound
mm.
with a scripture with shallow implications or didn't sit in the trenches with me.
Yeah,
And I think I get why we think that. And I still fall into the trap of thinking that like let me put my best foot forward, you know.
yeah.
But I think back to those moments where I was like, does anybody see me?
Mm.
And the moments I remember, like I remember this one moment, Chris Kane, who not everyone in Australia knows each other, especially in ministry fields. But every now and then you'll get a connection that is like a crazy connection. So my dad, Chris's husband, Nick, was my dad's intern when they were like kids. And so my dad married Chris, and Nick was the pastor that officiated the wedding. And so it just so happened that we lived in LA at the same time. And she reached out and she walked alongside me during that divorce. And if you know Chris, she's not like I want to say like the Joel Osteen of pastors. Like she's
Yeah.
not gonna sit with you and like help lick the wounds or whatever. She'll be like,
Hmm.
"Come on, mate, get up. You got this.
Yeah.
God's got you." Like, and she's gonna call you to the next thing. That's her bent. But I remember sitting with her and her just like crying.
Mm.
And I didn't know at the time she was also having a really rough year in ministry. But I didn't need to know the details of her current story to feel that she was with me in mind. Does that make sense? Because I think
Yeah.
sometimes we think like,
Yep.
well, what do I do with these unhealed pieces? Because we
Hmm.
also have the tendency sometimes to like bleed all over people or like, let me go live on Instagram or TikTok right now and like tell everyone how broken my heart is and call it vulnerability. And I'm like, I don't know that that's helping anyone. I think you should see a therapist. Like there is this fine line we walk between how do we show the broken parts without bleeding all over people, you know?
Hmm.
But I just don't ever want to get to the space where I get so healed that you can't even see my scars anymore. like where I get so healed, like that kind of healed,
Mm-hmm.
professional. Because I just remember like sitting there and knowing that she recognized what I was going through and wasn't trying to fix it. She was just like, and yet I know God's got a story for you.
Yeah.
And she told me a story of another pastor in ministry who I looked up to and still do so much that had been divorced. And she's like, Elyse, this is not the end of the story. And I think there was something in there
Mm.
that gave me permission to sit across from other people and say, hey, your story doesn't have to be mine in order for me to also know that God's not done with your story.
Mm-hmm.
Here's my story. And you might not be able to relate to the events, but I think we can relate to the emotions.
Yeah.
And that's the biggest thing I've come down to is like, and I just don't want to get to a point where I'm afraid of showing someone my scars because I believe the lie that they'll think less of me
Yeah.
when
That's good.
all I have ever known is that when I show people my scars, it gives them permission to roll up their sleeve and show me theirs.
Mm-hmm.
And I think honesty is the thing that unlocks honesty in other people. And sometimes when we get really professional in church and ministry, and I've done this, I've been there, is that we demand to see other people's scars, but we're not willing to show our own.
Mm-hmm.
And the greatest table we can set for healing, I think, is to go first. And I know that that's scary. I've
Yeah.
been there. But having seen what God can do with it, I'm just too convinced now that it's how I want to do it. Because it's
Yeah.
kind of selfish, I think. God heals another layer in me too at the same time.
Yeah. Yep.
Like he's healing you, he's unlocking honesty in you. But make no mistake about it, he's also healing another layer in me. This is that we
Yeah.
come by the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony. And that was how I walked through so much of my healing was I would just share my testimony, holding on to that, like, God, I'm gonna overcome. I'm gonna overcome another layer. And I think
Yeah.
that maybe when we can get brave enough to be honest enough to show the broken pieces, God doesn't just heal them, but he heals another layer in us too. So,
Mhm. Yeah, it's good. It's good. Um, and I think if you're listening and you're dissecting your own story right now, um, my prayer, my hope is that you recognize yourself in these conversations, this conversation that we just had, and recognize that God doesn't leave you where you're at.
mhm.
He will not leave you where you are. And if you're on the other side of it and you're like, now what do I do? Like, oh, okay, I have a story.
Yeah.
Um, just be willing and open to
Yeah.
recognize that God will use every bit of it in this season of your life. And I'm just going to keep echoing this. I say this often to people when they get really confused about purpose and calling and all the things. Um, Purpose, every person is born with the same purpose, know God and make him known. Like we want to know him intimately. We want to tell others about him, whether you recognize that or not. And calling is the unique way in which we fulfill that purpose in any
Yeah.
given season.
Yeah.
Our purpose never ever changes. Doesn't matter if you're in the middle of your story, pain point, or you're on the other side of your story and it's wonderful and glorious. Um, your purpose doesn't change, but your calling can shift in seasons. And sometimes seasons are longer than others. I mean, Elise went through a 7-year season of like, man, just healing and restoration and just reminding her of who God is and his
Yeah.
faithfulness and his goodness. Um, and so seasons change, callings can shift. And so if you're on the other side of your story, just recognize God probably is going to bring that thing up to use it somewhere, somehow, in some way. And don't be afraid to do that because the world around us need us to be authentic and honest and raw
Right.
and real, because that's the nature of God, right? I mean, Jesus died on a cross in front of a crowd and was the most vulnerable that anyone has ever been, as he was torn to shreds, literally. And so, you know, just be expectant that God will use it and that it's okay. It's okay. It's okay to reveal. I love that you said, roll up your sleeves and show your scars too. And I love that because it is part of every story. It is part
Yeah.
of every story. And we all have scars and we will have more scars along the
Yep.
way.
Yep.
It's just part of life. And so, Elyse, if people want to get in touch with you or like find your books, how do they do that?
I know. I'm in the middle of I work with a book agent right now. We're starting to write again in the middle of also having this child. But right now, the best way they can contact me is just through Instagram, like being on the journey with me. And my Instagram is just my first name. It's at ELYSE at Elyse. And
Mhm.
they can connect for any of like the inquiries and like speaking inquiries or just connection inquiries. That's on my website. I believe it's ElyseMurphy.com. I believe I've linked ElyseMahan.com. She's a tech genius. Look at her go. I believe it on it now. But they can just do that and if
Yeah,
they're in Lakeland, Florida, hit me up, you know?
come on. Florida's
So
the best
right
state. I'm
now
just
we are in a
saying.
we're in a full season with family and I'm honestly pumped to be so. So um I'm learning that it's all seasons. So we're having fun with it though. But it's been so great to be here. Thank you for just having this conversation with me. I feel full.
Good, me too. And I'm really grateful for you to join us. And thank you for being just authentic and sharing your story with us. And yeah, follow along with Lisa's journey and see the ways that God has decided to use her story in spaces and places. I have tuned into her preaching without her knowing, like I do that Instagram stalking thing. And
I
so
love it.
girl can preach. Let me just say that. She is fiery when she preaches, and it's good. It will move your soul. And so I encourage you to check that. Check her out. Check out the books that she's written also. And thanks for joining us. And we hope to see you around on the next episode. Thanks so
Ma'am, I love
much.
you.